This is about going mainstream and building consumer apps. And kind of the goal for us in this panel is to have all of you learn a few more insights from people who are doing this right now and from the rest of the audience, and actually the rest of the panelists who are funding this feature. I want to kind of start off by asking Shayne to kind of take us back a few years ago when you started Polymarket. Give us a overview of kind of how the ecosystem was. Were you kind of excited about starting a consumer-focused app? Were people waiting to kind of build and use consumer apps? Were VCs eager to fund these things? Kind of what was it like a few years ago? And tell us about how things have changed as you compare this to now.
Absolutely. So when I decided I was going to build Polymarket, I was not thinking about consumer crypto or what VCs were going to think or anything like that. I think if you go back to the genesis of blockchains, like when the earliest thought leaders were hypothesizing about the best killer applications, again and again, it always came back to the idea that you could have free markets on everything. Transparent, free, globally accessible markets. The global prediction market. When you think about new technological paradigm shifts, oftentimes there's a certain few unlocks, and like for blockchains, it's this idea that you can create a market for free in like minutes. And traditionally, it's extremely tedious to create new markets. So when I was deciding, hey, I'm going to go build Polymarket, it was the confluence of that I was such a big believer in the academic research that underpinned information markets, the idea that if you let people bet on things, you would actually get the most accurate information. And the complementary to that, the idea that people had tried to build what Polymarket is today, and people had hypothesized about it. And I was a big user and a big fan of that, namely also what Joey built with Augur. And I had a very visible it was very visible to me how it could be done right that no one was building. And then it was the timing of like, hey, imagine if we had these markets at the onset of the pandemic where you could hedge risk. I mean, I'm from New York City, born and raised, and every business is going bust at the onset of the pandemic. No one knows when things are going to open up. And what happens if you had markets about when things would open back up or when the vaccine would be ready? So I went through and I was like, hey, I really do believe that this is a generational company that no one's building. And I thought that me being the markets nerd that I was and still am, as well as someone who was creative and could build consumer products, I was like, hey, why don't I go build this? And very early on, despite when we first launched, it was on Ethereum, layer 1, and there was a lot, it was very tedious. It was clear to me that there was a semblance of product market fit that just was untouched and uncovered. And if I followed that eventually there'd be open ocean. So that was really the trail that I followed.
Yeah.
And I think now a lot of time people talk about consumer crypto, and when you talk about the traction, it's very exciting. This year, it's been a little over $1.4 billion traded on Polymarket. And what's way more exciting is the fact that a lot of people have incorporated it into their news digest and how they follow what's going on in the world. And that is really the fruition of the vision and the thing that is motivating to us as the people who are building it. But when it comes to building a product for a large audience, consumer, product development and understanding your users and understanding how you're going to reach them, like there's no replacement for that. It doesn't matter if it's crypto, it doesn't matter whatever buzzword you throw into it. So I think that it's exciting that we've been able to get to where we're at because it's been a really traditional product-oriented focus to building a company, and it just happens to be built on a blockchain.
That's amazing. Since you brought this up anyway, Joey, you are one of the founders of Augur, the original prediction market protocol. Would be great to kind of actually contrast this to kind of when you tried Augur about 10 years ago, actually. What was kind of the world like? And then also, we've kind of seen so many improvements in the infrastructure of kind of building on blockchains. And kind of how do you think that's kind of enabled anyone from Polymarket to other protocols or other products to flourish?
Yeah, I mean, I think when we started Augur, it was definitely like 10 years too early. I think Shayne's also better at kind of the product zeitgeist stuff, what people want. But I think also, stuff like Polymarket's also been enabled by a lot of the advancements that have happened in the space over the last decade. And so to kind of walk through some of those, I mean, when we started writing Augur smart contracts, there weren't even like testing suites to like actually test smart contracts. You just had to use print statements. Like if you ever kind of written like Apple Basic or Microsoft Basic back in the day, the way you debugged was just by printing through various parts of your program and trying to kind of manually figure out what was going wrong. So that was like one piece. The other piece was the scalability side of things. So layer 2s like weren't even an idea back then. People kind of thought that maybe layer 1 scaling was all you need, and or / also like there weren't even that many use cases that like required high throughput. And so when you had like fees spike on Ethereum periodically, it would cost like $200 to place a bet. So just like completely unreasonable. And so you have kind of the advent of layer 2 scaling, things like Arbitrum, Optimism, Polygon, which is what Polymarket's built on, which was sort of the first kind of initial scaling thing on Ethereum that actually like sort of worked. There was stuff before that actually that no one's heard of these days. So that's what you have on the scaling side. And then you also have a couple other things that are, I think, really important. The next one is a stablecoin. So stablecoins didn't exist back in 2014. And now you have decentralized ones like DAI, you have centralized ones like USDC, and I think that makes it way easier for people to think about when you're placing a bet. It's easier to have kind of a stable unit of account to do that. And then I would say the third thing, which is still a little bit more in its infancy but rapidly improving, is the tools you can use as a developer to make like things like onboarding user experience, and also like the fiat kind of on-ramp from going from dollars or yen or whatever to crypto. Back in those days, like people were using like Mist, which was like if you're not familiar, it was a local browser wallet that
free MetaMask era.
Yeah, the Ethereum used. Or like to even run Augur back then, you had to download a thing on your computer. You had to sync a full Ethereum node. It took like 6 or 7 hours just to even launch the application. It was very primordial stuff. And now I think like you go to Polymarket, even if you've never used crypto before, you can get a wallet basically with an email. I'd say the fiat to crypto part is still kind of like, I think that will improve over the next couple of years, and that'll probably be the next phase shift on the UX side. But yeah, as I say, the space has evolved a lot over the years, and it's really cool to see this stuff getting massive traction.
Amazing. I think all that infrastructure stuff is kind of what's made it a lot easier for everybody to now experiment more and actually build applications instead of more infrastructure. And Shai, I want to get to you, and I want to kind of understand how you think about classifying what consumer apps are. Do you kind of think of them as a different category, or do you think anything that touches people on a day-to-day thing kind of fall into the consumer space? Do payment apps count consumer? What's kind of your framework?
I don't really try to categorize the apps. I don't think it's a super useful exercise because for the most part, we haven't seen what's possible yet. Like we're really in the very early stage of developing these end-user-facing applications. But if I had to categorize them, I would say, trading related, that's one of the categories. Like Polymarket would probably fall under that category, or prediction markets in general, like fall under that category of trading related. And then NFTs would also, NFT marketplaces is also in that category. Gaming, I would say, is probably another category. I think that I don't think we've seen that many games that people love yet. But I think the kind of games that will work is the kind of games that that involve some kind of real money transfer or exchange, because that's what crypto is really good for. Payment is probably, I mean, if you had to, you could put payment as being part of consumer-facing applications as well. Although in like Web2, you would call it like fintech or something. But we see a lot of payment in underserved markets, especially in emerging markets, as well as industries that are traditionally underbanked. in fact, sports betting is one of those, and then there's the adult industry and cannabis and that kind of stuff. So there's payment, and then we're also, so at Alliance, we incubate a bunch of startups, and we're seeing some very new, novel consumer apps that we haven't seen before that are uniquely enabled by crypto. So for example,
I was going to say, give us an example.
yeah. So for example, there's a dating app that's launching today, and the idea is to leverage crypto as a form of micropayment. So basically, what you do is, the guy. So there is a man and a woman, right? The man will stake a small amount of USDT, like $1 or something, in order to show like serious interest into the woman, and vice versa. So this will show more intentionality from the part of the throughout the history of dating apps.
The online dance of.
One of the key problems is like the guy always has an incentive to swipe right all the time, right? So there's no intentionality. But when you have to stake a small amount of money, it shows more interest, more intention towards the woman. And this is something that's uniquely enabled by crypto, because before crypto, you had to use let's say credit cards. You know this very well. Like credit cards, you cannot really do like $1 payment, right? Like credit card company has to charge like, I don't know, 25 cents or something. So that's like a 25% take rate on a $1 payment. And also there's a lot of chargeback problems with credit cards. So like if you send some money to a sports betting website with your credit card, and you lose money, you can call the credit card company and just cancel the payment and get your money back. So like these are real problems with credit cards that crypto stablecoins can uniquely solve. And we're thinking about like other potential types of consumer applications that can be enabled by this.
So kind of when you see a pitch like this, do you kind of think about, hey, would this be a market where you have millions or hundreds of millions or billions of users, or do you kind of feel like, hey, these are super kind of unique, specific cases that are uniquely amplified with crypto, and that's good enough. You don't need to have 1 billion users, 100,000 active users that are really passionate about this category can salute the job.
Well, so the size of the market is probably the most important question for early stage venture investing. However, I think most venture investors overestimate their ability to assess the size of the market. So I recognize that, and I actually rarely think about the size of the market for that precise reason, because I'll be wrong anyway. So what I think about is, is this a new type of behavior that is uniquely enabled by crypto, right? But in the specific case of dating apps, we know for a fact that it's a huge market. Like Tinder, it's making billions of dollars a year. So that's that.
No, makes a lot of sense. I want to come back to you, Shayne. So you mentioned a lot of the last few years have been kind of listening to user feedback and making it a super easy-to-use product. Can you walk us through sort of some of the design decisions and product decisions you've made that make the market usable?
I think that the thing to stress is at the core of being an entrepreneur who's going to build a consumer-facing product is you really need to understand what you're building, who you're building it for, and why people are going to choose. Not necessarily thinking, oh, this is why I'm going to use this over that, but why people subconsciously are going to use your product instead of other alternatives. And I think that the reason that people are excited about Polymarket is because it's the best thing in the market for what it does, and it happens to be uniquely enabled by crypto. Whereas for something like a dating app, but you have to stake tokens in order to signal your interest, it's like the core part of a dating app is the network effect and the critical mass of the people who are looking to go on dates or other things. And so I think that at the end of the day, when you're going to be building a consumer product, everything needs to be about who you want to be using it, what you're building for them, why they're going to use it, and then how you're going to reach them. So when I think about with Polymarket, when we first moved to a layer 2, at the time it was called Matic, then it changed its name to Polygon. Polymarket is not named after Polygon. We were called Polymarket first, putting the record out there publicly. And so we had to go and look into Magic Link and account abstraction and meta transactions and obviously bridging, and like there were all these verticals, and it's exciting now that those things have been productized because we had to spend a lot of time on it, and now it's just like SDK, and you can just like embed it into your, well, you can integrate into your product, embedded wallets, so-called. And you know, I think that the more and more infrastructure there is, the less of an excuse there is to build something that has no users or no traction. But what I will say is that in the early days of Polymarket, like there is something to be said about having friction for your consumer product and being like, I need to build something so good that people love so much that people really desire to use that they're going to jump through hoops. You know, they're going to figure out how to go and bridge, or they're going to figure out how to make an account in order to onboard. And I think that that's a healthy exercise. So you know, and in terms of the other infrastructure that would need to be built, I mean, I think there's really two things that come on. One is, say that you know someone outside this convention center in Singapore like wants to go in and get on, and you know they have all the Southeast Asia apps they use. The lower friction it is to get fiat into stablecoins, obviously that's just going to benefit everyone. And the tricky part with it is like people who go and figure out how to game any of the efficient, like quick models, like they go and make it difficult for everyone who's doing it organically. And then the second is, you know, it's still fringe, and the more clarity there is around how to do this the right way to fit into various different regulatory matrices, the better it is in terms of going and reaching the larger swath of people who can use these things. But at the same time, I do think that you can get a lot of data on if you've built something that people want, and if there's core product market fit, even if it's a smaller net amount, but due to increased friction. But you can still see if there's something there or not. And then the rest is about going and expanding, growing the pie.
So maybe I'll kind of jump in a little bit and kind of poke here. What has been like the most common complaint or things that people get confused about that you see?
I think that we take for granted as people who are in this space, like bridging, different chains, ERC20, the word token. It is a different language to normal people, and we think that our community is like really large, but it's very small in the scheme of things in terms of just building a global consumer application. And when it comes to people trying to go and, because you know everyone has their own wallet, it's not, you know, Polymarket's not custodial. We're not holding anyone's stablecoins, but we want to go and make it as simple as possible for people to go and have their own wallet and to send stablecoins to it. So the more and more bridging that you have to go to, and the more and more fiat on-ramps that don't work, or you send it on the wrong chain, those are things that there's no alternative to really going and putting yourself in the mind of a beginner or of someone who just doesn't have a clue how this stuff is supposed to work, and just if there's a way where they can make a mistake that would poof their money because they send on the wrong chain, like those are the things that you need to have guardrails for, and that you need to shepherd the user in the correct direction. So that's obviously like in terms of time to value for trading, like it's like a necessary evil and something that we gotta continue to go and streamline.
Yep. Maybe a question for all of you here. A super interesting part, especially kind of as you gave the dating example, is that you kind of get to introduce different incentives. And we've kind of seen those drive really, really interesting behaviors. Do you kind of think that if you want to do something successful in crypto as a consumer app, you kind of need gamification to built in as part of this, and that's the only kind of way to do this thing? Or you can uniquely look at utility of some application, and that drives the value? Kind of, what are your thoughts on how do we actually drive anywhere from retention to new user growth, and how much role does gamification play in this?
I can jump in. I don't think gamification is necessary. I think fundamentally retention comes from you solving a core need for the consumer. gamification could be helpful. So the other day I was using Temu, which is it's like a cheap Amazon goods, like cheaper version of Amazon. Like it's crazy how much gamification there is on Temu.
A lot of spinners and
exactly.
games, yeah.
And I found myself kind of addicted for like 20 minutes just spinning the wheels. And that certainly improves retention for Temu. But I think it's icing on the cake rather than being part of the core loop.
Yeah. I would just say you can't polish a turd. And if you have a product that's leaky and that people don't want to use, or that if people do use it because you have some incentive and then they leave right after, no amount of gamification or something like that is going to change that. I think where you see gamification really be like the most meaningful driver is usually in very saturated markets where there's like commoditized products, and you need to go and basically fabricate or like artificially create loyalty and retention because there's low switching costs between products. So I think that gamification is awesome, and like you mentioned with Temu, and even when I use products, like I like it. I like it as a user.
Loyalty rewards as a business.
Exactly. But ultimately, if you're not building on solid ground and solid foundation of something that people really want to use, like you mentioned, that solves a real problem, then you're just polishing a turd.
Joey, a question for you as you kind of think about a lot of these products that come to you. What kind of excites you when you see a really good pitch for a consumer product here? And are there kind of some traits that you look for? Are there certain things that you feel like are kind of missing? And if anybody kind of comes to you with those magic words and sentences of this is what I'm building, you're like already excited. What's kind of your framework for funding applications?
Yeah, I think on the consumer side, especially if the product's already live, you can look at early traction signs. I think if you stick with Polymarket as an example for a moment, a lot of people tend to have this view that things are like an overnight success. But Shayne was like emailing me, I think back in like 2016 or 2017 about prediction markets, and we sort of talk to each other off and on a handful of times a year for I guess like 6 years or something at this point. And when I would talk with him, the main criteria I always had, which leads to how we actually ended up investing, was like I forget the exact number, but it's basically like essentially it was talk to me when you have like some repeatable product market fit where you're getting in the news and you have markets that like are the place that people go to bet on like current events that are like big current events happening in the world. And most people think, oh, we invested because of the election traction. And I'd say two things. One is like when we actually like shook hands or whatever, the election traction like wasn't that big, and then it's really become a rocket ship since. But the other thing was that there was this consistent, repeatable traction on non-election markets, and I think like you saw Polymarket being both used for people to bet on things like whether Sam Altman would be rehired at OpenAI, whether SpaceX's Starship launches would meet certain success criteria.
The Fed interest rates, I mean, like it's crazy.
Yeah, there's a million things you use it for, but then you also saw it being used by a second group of people, which is people who are not betting on it, but they're using it for the information that the markets have, and they're citing it and telling other people about it, and they sort of serve as like free marketing, and then like some percentage of people will bet on it, but you have these other people who are just evangelists because they use the information, and so I think to tie this back together to your consumer question, like if you have a product that has this sort of like really nice flywheel, that's probably the most like positive thing you could see on the consumer side, where it's like, okay, it really makes sense to make an investment, and then like the converse of that is like when either you don't have a real flywheel or you have a flywheel but it's kind of a fake flywheel because you've injected like either like an insane amount of cash or rewards or whatever to incentivize people, and incentives aren't bad, like you can do a little bit of incentives, but obviously if you're giving people like $5 and you make like $2 in revenue or whatever, then that's not really worth it. But so yeah, I think it comes down to like the flywheel on the product side is that and then the founder. I think you have a later question about that, so I'll skip the founder.
No, that actually was the next question. It was like, so you kind of answered what the business side looks like, but what makes a good a founder from kind of both of your perspectives, and what are some of the traits that you look for, and when do you think it's like the right founder product fit?
I guess it depends on the type of products, but we generally look for people like Shayne and Joey. Like as investors, we do a lot of pattern matching. I can't tell exactly what we look for, but like you can sense if that's the right founder for certain type of products, right? But I can tell you that the founders that are building novel products, novel consumer products, not payment, not gaming, but like like really new things that we haven't seen before. We look for founders that are able to think in non-conventional ways. I would interview them for 20 minutes, and I hope to hear something that makes me go, aha, I haven't heard of this before, and this guy can really think in a weird, non-conventional way. And obviously, they need to be able to execute. That's really important because it's almost certain that your first product won't pan out, and you're going to have to pivot. And we see this with almost every single one of our founders. Like even like the dating app or any other app, like they come in with a initial idea of what they want to build, and then they try it out for 2 weeks. It doesn't work. They need to either do a soft pivot, same category, or like hard pivot into something completely different. Like every single one of our best investments we've made in the last couple of years on the consumer side are those who pivot at least 2 or 3 times, like hard pivots. And this is fundamentally different from infra, because infra, like you have a end goal in mind, and a lot of it is a pure engineering problem. And you just solve that, like Solana. Like
it's measurable, you can check for it.
Exactly, it's measurable, it's more of a closed form problem, whereas consumer is very open-ended. You don't really know where you're going, to be honest. So we expect the startups to execute very fast, to test their hypothesis very quickly.
Maybe out of curiosity, was there any pivot involved in the history of Polymarket?
Definitely. I mean, it's funny because once I built Polymarket, not really. And I think that there was a lot of constant pressure over time of like, oh, well, now NFTs are the hot thing. Now this is the hot thing. And I've always been very interested in those as a user, but I think that if you think about the amount of consumer crypto startups that have maybe been funded and the amount that have users, right, like it's a large delta. Much larger than if you would think about consumer products that are funded that are just normal. And I do think that the bar is just lower in our space when it comes to traction. And a lot of the time, the accountability for an entrepreneur is just to investors, or maybe if they do a token or something like that. Whereas if you're really betting on, hey, we're going to go and build a product, ultimately you need to build something that people love, that people use, that should speak for itself. So I do think that there is something about having deep conviction and having early product market fit, early signs that maybe other people may be dismissive of, but that you can see, and following that intuition and building it the right way. Because when we had early usage, it was like, okay, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong, but people really do enjoy trading on something that they have an opinion on, that they understand.
Participating in the closest that they could find.
And people also do find it interesting to look at the prices of these things. So like, how can we go and bring this to a broader audience? So I think that when I'm no VC, so these are the professionals with that. But I do think that it is critically important to be able to iterate with product development quickly, to be able to make changes, to be able to use the product yourself, develop an intuitive feel about what feels right, what doesn't feel right, where do you subconsciously float, where do your eyes go, what are you confused about, if you put it in front of your friend, what is your friend confused about? And getting into the nitty-gritty, and then being really obsessive over how your early customers and how the people who do show up to use the product early on, how they feel about it, what do they like, what do they not like, what you lean into, what you remove. And if you are unable to go and get that feedback loop right of like feedback, iterate, you are so disadvantaged to build a consumer product that can eventually scale. So I think that's the most important thing, no matter how you slice it. And the crypto magic is obviously necessary and it enables a lot of cool things that you can do with products, particularly around markets that beforehand you wouldn't be able to do. Or if you were able to do it, it would be very siloed and difficult. But it's no replacement or it's no alibi for not getting product right at its core.
Okay.
I actually have a comment on what you just said about fast iterations. This ties back to what you said earlier about how the infrastructure changed in the last few years. Is that today it's actually a lot easier to iterate fast than it was like 5 years ago because of the infra, because of the developer experience is much, much better. So I really think we're in a...
You can launch an L2 chain in 3 minutes.
Yeah.
Crazy.
It was wild. Well, so actually, so maybe I'm kind of curious to hear any of your thoughts here. Do we have to make it known that there's some consumer app or something that people want is powered by crypto? Like, is it necessary? Just we don't advertise what database I'm using for my note-taking app. Do we have to sort of make it up front that this has to be a consumer crypto app? Why can't it just be an app that has elements and some benefits from stuff that we get from blockchains or stablecoins or kind of some few things? Do you kind of draw the distinction anywhere?
No, I think it depends on depends on the product.
Of course.
If you're building a payment product that uses crypto under the hood, you don't need to advertise about crypto at all. You don't need to advertise the stablecoin part at all. I think it's entirely possible to abstract away the stablecoin part out of the cross-border payment product, for example. But for a product that that requires the deposit of crypto into the website, like prediction market, for example, then I don't know if you guys actually advertise crypto at all, but
well, you do also support credit cards.
Well, that's via an integration, because that's like a third-party API. You embed MoonPay, and they have all that stuff sorted. Yeah. I think it's nuanced. If you have more to say, but I don't.
Yeah, again, just depends on the product.
Yeah, I think it's nuanced. I think that if people are very crypto native, you want to be able to meet them where they're at. But as the core and default flows of a product, if you impose the barrier that people need to understand bridging or they need to understand different chains, you're churning a ton of people immediately, and you're confusing them, and it's a terrible user experience. And I think we see this a lot with bridging. Bridging is a non-trivial concept for people who are used to using PayPal to understand. And the baseline is like, sure, some people are going to be able to go to different bridging sites. They're going to have different wallets. They're going to have crypto assets on different chains. And those people will figure it out no matter what. But the people who aren't as privy to that and aren't as accustomed to being a multi-chain sleuth, how can you meet them where they're at so that they can still use the product? Because the more you expand the time to value, the harder it is for people to get that first magic feeling of using the product, the more and more difficult it becomes to go and get a viral loop and to go and have something that can grow organically. So these things become of paramount importance. But to tie it back, like some of the most iconic products that we use today, their first version where they got a lot of traction were really shitty and really ugly. And even Craigslist today, a lot of us still use it, and it's just disgustingly ugly. But there's critical mass and there's strong density in the marketplace, and that supersedes looking nice. So there's a lot of variables, but the cool thing about building products for people is that the market doesn't lie. And
they'll tell you.
I think with infra, one of the reasons a lot of people in our space go to it is because you can really mask does this thing actually solve a problem? Are people really going to use this? So it just becomes easier to play that cycle of raise money and whatnot. And it's just a lot more hard. It's much more difficult to go build something that people are going to want to use. But I find it more fun. And I do think that you make more impact building it that way. And there's a lot of infrastructure there. So it's time for us to go build some fucking product.
I guess one other thing we'd love to kind of get your advice on, Shayne, is how do you actually market your product, and how do you kind of think people should be marketing it? Because you're trying to attract people who are comfortable with both worlds, and you want obviously both of them involved to grow. What's kind of a good way you found that works with people where they're not scared of crypto but still want to play, and how should other founders think about this?
Yeah, I mean, the more technically complex, the more crypto and on-chain there is involved in the core product, obviously the conversion rate is going to suffer. But that is what it is, and over time, I think that trend will move in our direction. I think that first and foremost, you need to build something that a core group of people who have some shared demographic or customer persona actually enjoy using. And if you're focused on marketing before then, you're not actually marketing a product. You're just passing time or figuring out reasons to procrastinate on building something useful. And I think what it comes down to is once you've built a product, you understand where your product sits in the marketplace compared to competitors or compared to alternatives, or there's some sort of latent demand that is not yet met and how you meet that. And then you understand who those people are who you're trying to target. Then you want to figure out the distribution channels to reach them. It's just simple, marketing 101, I'd say. And for us, as we've gotten traction in different verticals, we just go back to first principles. And I think that when it comes to the crypto element, and I think we could do a lot better job in this, you want to educate the users, you want to handhold them, you want to make it as easy for them as possible. And on the flip side, if you're just building for the crypto echo chamber, which there's nothing wrong with, I love that.
Luckily, that group is getting bigger too.
Yeah, and that's growing and getting bigger, and then you can kind of pass the buck on people figuring out on chain and how to get onboarded in different and all the DeFi primitives. But then you do you have a smaller TAM, but nothing wrong with that. There's still a lot of awesome things that have been built there. But you're always weighing all the different variables. But at the end of the day, when you go back to first principles and go back to basics, that's when I think you'll find the best results.
Awesome. Joey, Qiao, any advice to founders as they kind of get started with building a company in this space, and things that you think they should focus or not focus on?
Yeah, on my end, I'm actually going to take that question and sort of pivot into answering the founder question, which may have some elements of advice in it, but because I think for us at Founders Fund, like the essential question is how do you evaluate founders and how do you select the best founders to back? And I think there's really like 3 or 4 things. So one of them is that the best founders move really quickly. They iterate fast. They're just kind of like constantly on. The second thing I think is that we kind of have this phrase that we use, which is like, we look for founders who can like bend the universe to their will. So great founders like are relentless. They don't give up. And then also, the other thing I think is people think of like, some firms think of selecting founders as like there's a selection of boxes and you want to check as many as possible. The best people at anything are very pointed. Like they have some areas where they spike and they're really, really good, like the best in the world at something, and there's some areas where they're terrible. The best people in any field, there's no one who is like insanely successful who is quote unquote well-rounded. We don't want well-rounded people. We want people who have like character. And then I'd say the third thing is there's this notion of which I'm borrowing this from Peter Thiel, who founded our firm. I was going through one of his old annual meeting presentations, and there's this slide of Michael Jordan, and it's a picture of Michael Jordan playing baseball. A lot of people don't know Michael Jordan actually started off as a baseball player, and the slide's basically about this notion of like founder market fit. And so he's actually a pretty mediocre baseball player, but obviously amazing at basketball. And so you need the right founder paired with the right market and the right company. And if you have that, that's you combine kind of all those 4 ingredients, and that's where something kind of really magical can happen.
Amazing. I think that's a good place to end this panel, and I want to thank all 3 of you for an amazing discussion.
Thanks for having us.